Good morning, good afternoon, good morning. Okay, a couple of items for you all at the top. Yesterday, the president laid out a once-in-a-century capital investment in America that will meet our current infrastructure needs, invest in manufacturing, research and development, and the care economy, rebuild our economy, and create good-paying jobs for American workers. Since then, we've seen praise for the president's vision from across the political spectrum, from business to labor, economists and climate leaders, in addition to support from bipartisan majorities of the American people. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce said, quote, "We need a big and bold program to modernize our nation's crumbling infrastructure, and we applaud the Biden administration for making infrastructure a top priority." The CEO of Ford Motors said that, quote, "Ford supports the administration's efforts to advance a broad infrastructure plan that prioritizes a more sustainable, connected, and autonomous future." The president of the League of Conservation Voters said, quote, "Today is a great day for jobs, justice, and climate action." And the international president of the SEIU called the jobs plan, quote, "a game changer for tackling racial and economic inequality." And early polling underscores the overwhelming bipartisan support for components of this plan. Just yesterday, a Morning Consult poll showed that by a 2-to-1 margin, registered voters backed a hypothetical $3 trillion infrastructure package. And a Data for Progress poll showed that by a 35-point margin, voters wanted to pay for this plan by asking the wealthy and big corporations to pay their fair share, just like the president is calling for. Two other items for all of you. Today, the Biden-Harris administration is launching a nationwide grassroots network of local voices and trusted community leaders to encourage people to get vaccinated. We've talked in here quite a bit about how effective and impactful we've seen having community voices, trusted voices, be the people who are getting the information out to communities. So this is a reflection of that. Some of the 250 founding members include NASCAR, the American Medical Association, NAACP, UNIDOS, the Chamber of Commerce, and Catholic Charities. Collectively, the group of founding members has the ability to reach millions of people and deliver critical public health information. This morning, the Vice President and Surgeon General Vivek Murthy spoke with some of the community core founding members about the unique efforts that communities across the country are taking to get more shots in arms, including by hosting virtual town halls, giving workers paid time off, and conducting direct outreach to people within their community, and a lot more work, of course, to come from there. Two more short items. President Biden, as a part of the American Rescue Plan, we have another development to convey. He promised, of course, to get health care costs down for families, through a number of steps he's taking. And beginning today, Americans can go to healthcare.gov to take advantage of reduced premiums, increased savings, and quality, affordable coverage. Americans currently enrolled in Marketplace coverage will see their premiums decrease on average by $50 per person per month and $85 per policy per month. So that certainly is a positive development. Last thing, finally, as part of our commitment to transparency, I wanted to let you know that the president was tested for COVID-19 this week. COVID-19 was not detected. He's tested every 2 weeks as a part of regular screening. Darlene, why don't you kick it off?
Thank you, Jen. A couple of questions on the infrastructure bill. Can you give us a sense, now that the president has announced the details, what comes next from the White House in terms of travel by the president or the vice president or any other members of the cabinet in terms of selling the plan? And will we see something similar to held this year for the COVID bill?
Well, I think you can certainly expect that the president, the vice president, will be involved in making calls, doing outreach, communicating with members of Congress, with governors, with elected officials, and of course with the American people. I will say the piece that's slightly different, or in addition to, is what the president announced at the cabinet meeting, which is that he has asked some key members of his cabinet to serve in a jobs cabinet, to be front and center voices engaging with members of Congress, with leadership in Congress, with governors, with elected officials, with the American public through media and through other direct communications, also traveling around the country to communicate about this plan that he's proposed. So that's another piece of it that you will see grow over the coming weeks.
And former President Donald Trump says that the tax increases that are in the corporate tax increases that are in the plan will shift more companies and jobs overseas, and that China will be the big winner there. it also depends on getting countries to stop a race to the bottom on corporate taxes, and we're just wondering, how do you get those other countries to go along with that idea of, not racing to the bottom on corporate taxes?
Well, we have a little chart, maybe we can pull up on the screen here, hopefully. We'll cue it to come up, just to show. Was it up before? Well, we'll bring it up again because it's a relevant one for people to take a look at. That just shows the journey of corporate tax rates over the course of the last several decades. The fact is, the corporate tax rate at 21% is lower than it has ever been in the past. What we're talking about is raising it to 28%, which is lower than it's been in the past several decades for most of that period of time. And it goes back to a rate that was the case during part of the Bush administration. See, as you can see here. Now, during the 60s, it was up over 50%. Obviously, that's incredibly high. And it's gone down progressively. And it was in the mid-30s, as you can see, through about 2015 or right before then. And then it went dramatically down. What we're talking about is just raising it to a rate that is lower than it has been through the vast majority of time over the last 70 years. And we think that's an incredibly reasonable proposal. I will say that in the wake of the 2017 tax giveaway to corporate America, I should say, 91 of the Fortune 500 companies paid no federal taxes. No, zero federal taxes. That is not something that the American people believe is fair, that we believe is fair. And what we're talking about here is making adjustments to the tax code to make it more fair, to invest in our infrastructure, invest in American workers, so that we can be more competitive over the long term.
And then lastly, earlier today in Kentucky, Senator McConnell was talking and said that the package, quote, is not going to get support from our side. He opposes the undoing of the 2017 tax cuts and said that, quote, I'm going to fight them every step of the way. So how do you respond?
I think there's some more questions to be asked. Does he disagree that our nation's infrastructure is outdated and needs repair? Does he disagree that we need to do more to put American workers back to work and to invest in industries that have growth potential over the long term? Does he disagree that 1/3 of the country who doesn't have broadband access should have access to broadband? There are a lot of areas where there is agreement with across the political spectrum, from investment in infrastructure, doing more to be competitive with China, and what we're really talking about here is how to pay for it. And so what we're looking for is proposals of alternatives. If you don't want to raise the corporate tax rate still lower than it's been over the last 70 years and across decades, if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to put in place a global minimum tax, what are the alternatives? We're happy to hear those proposals. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Yesterday, when President Biden spoke about corporate taxes, he specifically named Amazon out of the kind of Fortune 500 companies that have paid zero federal taxes. Why did he just name Amazon?
It's just an example. As I noted, there were actually 91 companies who didn't pay any corporate taxes in 2018, so there were many to pick from.
And about the Baltimore plant, we understand that there is a contamination of about 15 million doses. When did this happen, and when did the administration find out?
Well, the issue was identified as part of rigorous quality control system checks, and HHS made us aware late last week.
And so we understand that this supply is headed to Europe and not for the United States. But how does that really overall sort of change J&J's supply plans? And were they planning to use this plant to deliver the 24 million doses they had planned to deliver by the end of April to the United States?
Well, the issue doesn't impact, one, any of the J&J doses that are available, of course, already on the market. Johnson & Johnson has made clear that they expect to deliver 24 million doses in April, and that they expect to meet their commitment of 100 million doses by the end of May. So we are looking forward to that. Obviously, these are doses that the U.S. government has purchased, but we also have plenty of doses from Pfizer and Moderna regardless.
So there is no supply disruption caused by the Baltimore plant for U.S. supply going forward?
For U.S. supply, for the supply that we are anticipating through the course of May, we have been assured that that they expect to meet those deadlines.
And one more about Hong Kong. As you're aware, there were 7 pro-democracy veterans who were advocates, pro-democracy advocates, who were arrested yesterday. And this is obviously, a continuation of Beijing trying to quash pro-democracy protests in the country. Do you have a comment? Is the administration monitoring that situation even now?
We certainly are. Today's politically motivated convictions in Hong Kong of 7 pro-democracy activists once again shows the degree to which Beijing seeks to crush all forms of peaceful dissent in the city. These activists were taking part in a peaceful demonstration of over 1.7 million Hong Kongers protesting for the autonomy and freedoms promised to them by the PRC. Their conviction is yet another example of Beijing eroding Hong Kong's freedoms and failing to live up to its international obligations under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Go ahead, Kelly.
Did the company, once the company informed the administration about the timing of the problems at the plant, there's so much focus from this White House about transparency. Was there an obligation to speak about this earlier than acknowledging today that you knew last week?
Well, I think it's important for people to remember that this plant has not been FDA approved. It's still going through a rigorous review. And J&J is, of course, working through that process to bring the facility online and gain authorization. So HHS updated us. In fact, this is probably the process working as it should. HHS updated us on J&J's manufacturing, including where things stood with the facility at the point where they learned about the issue. It wasn't going to impact our supply. It wasn't going to impact the supply to the American people. And of course, J&J is working through this with the FDA. So we'd certainly refer to them on the process.
On the infrastructure, climate, jobs plan, the president also talked about inviting Republicans to the Oval Office.
Yeah.
Given the comments from his longtime friend Mitch McConnell, do we have that on the books yet? And do you anticipate that there is any legitimate room to move? Or is the White House really settling into the idea that this will be a Democrats-only push in order to accomplish this big priority?
Well, we just announced the proposal yesterday. There's a long history of agreement on infrastructure and the need to invest in infrastructure, the need to take steps to be more competitive with China. We feel there are a lot of areas of agreement, and the president will certainly be inviting Republicans and Democrats here to the Oval Office to have discussions and meetings about the path forward, to hear their ideas. There are some differences between the ARP. The ARP, the American Rescue Plan, was an emergency package. We needed to get it done as quickly as possible to get the pandemic under control, get relief direct checks out to Americans. We've got a little bit more time here to work and have discussions with members of both parties. We want to see progress by Memorial Day. We'd like to see this package passed by the summer, but I certainly expect when Congress returns that the president will be inviting members to the Oval Office.
And when you consider that timeline, certainly there are Democrats, and especially the most progressive Democrats, who would like to see the ability to get this done quickly in order to touch on some of the other priorities that are in different topic areas. Is there a real sense, though, that you can work with Republicans when the leader says there will be no support, when the House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, says we love infrastructure, but we don't like this tax idea? Is there any room left?
I think that's a question for them. They support investment in infrastructure, right? They believe we need to do more to compete with China. Maybe they don't believe we should pay for it. If so, they should say that. Maybe they have different alternative ideas. There have been some proposals out there about user fees or gas taxes, essentially. We don't agree with that. We don't believe that the cost should be on the backs of the American people. We believe that corporations should be able to bear the brunt for investing in America's workers. But they can come forward with their ideas. We believe we can start from a place where we agree.
And given that the COVID economy has been hard on so many businesses, is this the time to try to increase taxes when they are not really out of the COVID slide of the economic impact of the pandemic?
Well, what we're talking about here, that's exactly why we shouldn't be increasing taxes on the American people, on people making less than $400,000 a year, why we shouldn't be putting in place user fees, because people are still trying to get through this period of time. Corporations who have had their tax rate lowered to 21%, lower by a great margin than it's been ever in history, corporations that didn't pay any taxes in 2018, we think they can afford to help rebuild our workforce, help invest in industries of the future, and make sure our infrastructure makes us competitive with China.
Thank you, Jen. You just repeated what the president was talking about yesterday. You want corporations to bear the brunt of the $2.25 trillion over 8 years, but there are these calculations now that the corporate tax hike is not going to raise that much until 2036. So I'm curious where the rest of the money comes from.
Well, as was outlined in detail in our plan, we're talking about paying for an 8-year investment over the course of 15 years. And that, given that the investments are short-term investments, investments that are